Welcome to your deep dive into ancient Greece. You requested this one, so we're going to unpack it all. Geography, city-states, and its lasting impact.
Yeah, it really is remarkable how much we've inherited from ancient Greece, even after all these years.
Oh, I know. It's funny, though. When I think of ancient Greece, I think of those iconic white marble temples and all the myths about the gods and goddesses.
Well, that's certainly a big part of it, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. There's a much bigger picture to uncover.
Okay, so let's rewind the clock a bit. What was ancient Greece actually like?
Well, to begin with, it wasn't one unified country. It was actually a bunch of independent city-states scattered across a mountainous peninsula and all those islands.
Okay, so picture this. A rugged, mountainous landscape, not much fertile land. How do you think that affected their way of life?
It pushed them out to sea. With limited land for crops, they had to find other ways to survive and thrive.
So they weren't just relaxing on those beautiful beaches.
Not quite. They became incredible sailors, traders, and explorers because they had to. Their skills at sea allowed them to connect with the rest of the Mediterranean world, and it fueled their economy. It's kind of like how the Dutch became such amazing seafarers later on in history. They didn't have much land either.
That's a really good comparison. I can see that. But hold on a sec. If they were all connected by the sea, why didn't they just band together and create one massive Greek empire?
That's where the geography comes in again. Those same mountains that limited their farmland, they also kept the city-states isolated from one another.
So connected by the sea, but divided by land.
Exactly. And because of those natural barriers, they developed into these distinct city-states. Each one had its own government, its own culture, its own military, even its own rivalries.
Okay, so now we've got all these independent city-states, each with its own unique identity. Were they constantly fighting amongst themselves?
There were definitely conflicts, for sure. Competition for power and resources was pretty much a constant. But here's the interesting part. They also knew how to work together, especially when they were up against a common enemy.
Right, like siblings who fight all the time but then team up when the neighborhood bully comes around.
Perfect analogy.
Eh.
And speaking of rivalry, we can't forget about the most famous pair, Athens and Sparta.
Oh, yeah, Athens and Sparta. I remember learning about them in school, but to be honest, it's all a bit of a blur.
Well, let's clear things up a little. Athens, known for its democracy, and philosophy was kind of like the cultural capital. Their system of direct democracy was really groundbreaking for the time. Imagine average citizens having a direct say in their government, voting on laws, serving on juries.
Wow, that's a pretty far cry from how we do things now. But was it actually effective? I mean, wouldn't it just be completely chaotic?
Of course, there were challenges, and we can talk more about those a bit later. But the idea that everyday people could shape their government was revolutionary. It's something that still inspires us today.
Okay, so that's Athens, the birthplace of democracy. Then there's Sparta. They were the warriors, right?
Exactly. Sparta was all about military strength and discipline, a highly structured society. Their whole social system, their emphasis on physical training from such a young age, it was unlike anything else.
So while Athenian citizens were debating in the marketplace, Spartans were probably doing push-ups in the barracks.
You got it. And that stark difference between them, it wasn't just a cultural thing, it fueled a serious rivalry, which played a huge part in shaping ancient Greek history.
I bet there was some serious tension. But they did work together sometimes, right? Like against the Persians.
You're absolutely right. The threat of the Persian Empire forced Athens and Sparta and many other Greek city-states to put their differences aside and join forces. It's in those moments of unity that you really see the strength and the complexity of this civilization.
It's giving me like Avengers Assemble vibes, except instead of spandex suits, it's togas and sandals.
I love that image. But before we get lost in the epic battles, we can't forget about the other major influence in ancient Greece, the gods and goddesses.
Ah, yes. The Greek pantheon, Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, all those larger-than-life figures. Were these just stories, or was there something more to it?
Their mythology, it was woven into every aspect of their lives. It wasn't just for entertainment. It provided explanations for the world, moral guidance. It shaped how they saw themselves and their place in the universe.
Okay, give me an example. How did that actually play out in their daily lives?
Let's take the Oracle of Delphi, for example. This sacred site, the home of the priestess known as the Pythia, she was believed to be the voice of the god Apollo.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of the Oracle, but I'm not entirely sure what that was all about.
People from all over Greece, kings, commoners, everyone, they would travel to Delphi to ask the Oracle for advice on everything. War, politics, marriage, you name it. They believed her prophecies, even though they were often cryptic and hard to interpret, held the key to their future.
So kind of like a combination of spiritual guidance and fortune-telling. but with serious political and social
You
implications.
got it. It really highlights how intertwined religion and mythology were with everything they did.
This is fascinating, but I keep going back to Athenian democracy. It sounds incredible, but I still can't help but wonder, how did it actually work in practice?
The Athenian system of direct democracy, it was like a grand experiment. Definitely wasn't perfect, but it set the stage for many of the democratic principles we value today.
Okay, so let's break it down. How did Athenian citizens actually participate in their government?
Well, instead of voting for representatives, eligible citizens could directly participate in the assembly. That's where they debated and voted on laws.
Wait, so any citizen could just show up and voice their opinion? That's pretty amazing. How did they get anything done?
It was a complex system. They had rules and procedures. For example, they had a system for randomly selecting officials, and they had term limits to make sure no one person or group could become too powerful.
So they were thinking about checks and balances all the way back then. Amazing. But there must have been some downsides too, right?
There were definitely limitations.
Yeah.
Athenian democracy, as groundbreaking as it was, it left out a lot of people.
Yeah.
Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded from participating.
Right. That's a huge chunk of the population.
Hmm.
So Athenian democracy, while innovative, it was also unequal.
That's important to remember. Their idea of citizenship and rights was very different from what we have today.
This is all so eye-opening. I'm really starting to rethink my whole understanding of democracy.
And that's what's so great about exploring ancient Greece. It challenges our assumptions and allows us to see things in a new light.
I'm totally hooked. So where do we go from here?
Well, now that we've got a handle on the geography and the politics of ancient Greece, I think it's time to dig a little deeper into Athenian democracy. Let's explore its successes, its failures, and its lasting impact on the world.
So we've only just touched on Athenian democracy, and I have to say, I'm already hooked. It's an idea that continues to inspire us even today, but like you mentioned, it wasn't without its problems.
True, Athenian democracy had its limitations, especially when we look back at it from a modern perspective.
Yeah.
But to really get it, I think we have to understand the historical context.
Absolutely. What were some of the key things that made Athenian democracy so unique?
Well, one of the most striking things was this concept of direct participation. Can you imagine a society where citizens weren't just voting for representatives, but actually shaping the laws and policies themselves?
That's such a powerful idea. But I imagine it wasn't always smooth sailing. Was it difficult to get everyone on the same page?
Yeah, reaching consensus wasn't always easy. The Athenian assembly, where citizens met to debate and vote, could get pretty heated. It was like a giant town hall meeting, but with thousands of people passionately voicing their opinions.
Wow, I can only imagine the drama. Were there any systems in place to keep things fair and prevent things from getting out of control?
Oh, they had systems for that. They had checks and balances, including randomly selecting officials, and they had term limits to make sure no one person or group could hold on to power for too long.
So they were already thinking about limiting power and promoting fairness way back then.
Exactly. They were pioneers in developing those democratic principles that we're still wrestling with today.
But as we discussed earlier, Athenian democracy wasn't exactly inclusive. Women, slaves, and foreigners, they were all excluded. How did they reconcile that with their ideals of equality and citizen participation?
It's a great question. It really highlights the complexities of Athenian society. Their definition of citizenship was very closely tied to things like land ownership and military service, which automatically left out a large portion of the population.
So while we can admire their democratic innovations, we also have to acknowledge the limitations and the inequalities that were built into their system.
Definitely. I think it's crucial to look at historical events and figures with a critical eye and recognize both their accomplishments and their shortcomings.
It's a reminder that progress is rarely a straight line. It's messy. It takes time. So despite its flaws, Athenian democracy had a huge impact on Western civilization. How did their ideas spread and influence other societies?
Their influence was widespread. The Athenian model of democracy became a source of inspiration for later thinkers and reformers like those who shaped the Roman Republic and even the founding fathers of the United States.
So you could say the legacy of Athenian democracy is still alive and well, even in the halls of power today.
I think so. Their ideas about citizen participation, deliberative assemblies, and the rule of law, they still resonate with democratic principles all around the world.
It really makes you think about our own systems of government today. Have we maybe strayed too far from those principles of direct democracy?
That's a great question to consider. In a world with millions of citizens, direct democracy like they had in Athens might not be practical.
Yeah.
But maybe there are ways to bring back some of those elements of citizen engagement and deliberation into our modern systems.
Definitely something to think about. Okay, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about another aspect of ancient Greece that I've always found fascinating: Their mythology.
Ah, yes. The gods and goddesses, the epic tales, the timeless lessons. Greek mythology never gets old.
It really is captivating, but sometimes I have to admit it feels a bit like a soap opera with all the drama and intrigue happening up on Mount Olympus.
Well, I think that's part of what makes it so appealing. Those Greek gods and goddesses, they weren't these distant, perfect beings. They were flawed, they were emotional, they were constantly meddling in human affairs, just like us.
So even with all their divine power, they were relatable.
Exactly. They represented both the best and worst of human nature, which made their stories even more compelling.
Can you give me an example? Which god or goddess really embodies that blend of human strengths and weaknesses?
We'll take Zeus, for example.
Yeah.
He was the king of the gods,
Yeah.
powerful and charismatic, a symbol of order. But he was also famous for his infidelity and his tendency to overreact.
He sounds a bit like a powerful CEO with a weakness for scandal. What about his wife, Hera?
Hera was the goddess of marriage and family, fiercely protective of her position. But she was also known for her jealousy and vengefulness, especially towards Zeus's lovers.
Sounds like a power couple with some serious relationship issues. But I'm guessing these stories were about more than just divine gossip, weren't they?
Of course, Greek mythology wasn't just about entertainment. It served a deeper purpose. Those myths offered explanations for the world around them, for things like natural phenomena, thunder and lightning, but also complex human emotions, love, loss, betrayal.
So a way to understand the world and the human experience.
Right. The myths gave them a framework for understanding life's mysteries, the power of fate, the consequences of our actions.
And they didn't shy away from difficult moral questions either.
Absolutely. They explored themes of justice, revenge, pride, the ongoing battle between good and evil.
It's amazing how these stories from thousands of years ago can still resonate with us today. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because they tap into universal truths about human nature. We still grapple with the same questions about love and loss, ambition, our place in the world.
And the storytelling itself, the epic journeys, the heroic battles, the tragic downfalls it all makes for such impelling narratives.
Well, definitely. And it's not just the stories, but the characters themselves. Figures like Odysseus and Hercules and Pandora, they've become part of our collective consciousness. They represent certain archetypes in human experiences.
It's really incredible how these characters from ancient myths can still inspire and influence us in the present day.
They're a reminder that even in a world so different from our own, humans shared similar hopes and fears and aspirations.
We've explored the political scene, the democratic ideals, and the mythological tapestry of ancient Greece, but there's one more piece of the puzzle I'd love to unpack. Their art and architecture. Those iconic white marble temples, the elegant sculptures, the intricate pottery, it all points to a remarkable artistic legacy.
And it's fascinating how their artistic expressions reflect their values and beliefs. Their pursuit of harmony, balance, and perfection. It's evident in everything from their temples to their sculptures.
I'm ready for a closer look. Let's dive into the world of ancient Greek art and architecture next. Okay, so we've talked about their democracy, their myths, but now I want to talk about the visual legacy of ancient Greece. Their art and architecture, those images are just so powerful and so recognizable even today.
Yeah, their artistic achievements are truly remarkable. And you know what's really fascinating is how much their art actually reveals about their culture, their values, like their emphasis on harmony and balance, and their striving for perfection.
Okay, so when I think of ancient Greek art, I instantly think of those white marble temples, like the Parthenon. What was it that made their architecture so unique?
Well, they developed these really distinct architectural styles. And the most famous ones are the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders. They're basically systems of proportion and decoration using things like columns, entablatures, pediments.
So it wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about the mathematical precision and the harmony of the design.
Exactly. They believed that beauty was rooted in mathematical principles, like the Parthenon, for example. It's full of subtle optical refinements. They have slightly curved lines and columns that actually lean inwards. And it's all designed to create this sense of visual harmony.
That's incredible. It's like they were blending art and science centuries before the Renaissance.
They definitely had a deep understanding of geometry and proportion. And they didn't just apply these principles to their grand temples. They used them for everything. Theaters, stadiums, even private homes.
So their whole world was designed with this idea of balance and beauty in mind.
Yeah, and let's not forget about sculpture. The ancient Greeks, they were masters at capturing the human form realistically. They could convey movement, emotion, even that idealized beauty that they admired so much.
I remember seeing some of those statues in museums and feeling like they could just step off their pedestals and walk away.
Right. They really did have this uncanny ability to breathe life into stone,
Right.
like the discus thrower or the Venus de Milo. Those are both perfect examples of their mastery of anatomy and form.
They really are breathtaking. But was realism always their goal, or did they ever experiment with more abstract forms?
While they were amazing at realism, they also understood the power of symbolism in abstract art, like their pottery, for example. It often features these really intricate designs and mythological scenes that give us a glimpse into their beliefs and stories.
It's like we're deciphering a visual language that tells us about their culture, their values, and their view of the world.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And you know what's amazing? The legacy of ancient Greek art and architecture. It still inspires artists and architects today. Their influence is everywhere, from neoclassical buildings to contemporary sculpture.
So it's not just about admiring beautiful relics from the past, it's about understanding how powerful and enduring their artistic vision was.
Exactly. By studying their work, we can learn so much about their culture and their values and how they saw the world. And who knows,
Right.
maybe we'll even find some inspiration for our own creative endeavors.
Okay, before we wrap up, I have to ask you something. There's something that's always kind of bugged me about ancient Greece. They were so advanced in so many ways: democracy, philosophy, art, architecture. But then you have the whole issue of slavery. How did they reconcile that with their ideals of freedom and democracy?
That's a really good question, and one that historians and philosophers have been grappling with for centuries. I think it's important to keep in mind that their concept of freedom and rights was very different from our modern understanding.
So while we can admire their achievements, we can't ignore those darker sides of their society.
I agree. It's crucial to look at history with a critical lens, recognizing both the progress they made and the injustices that were present.
Well said. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about ancient Greek literature. I have to admit, my knowledge of Greek literature is pretty limited. I've read the Odyssey, but that's about it.
The Odyssey is a great starting point. It's one of the most important works of Western literature, full of adventure drama and timeless themes.
I remember being totally absorbed by the story of Odysseus and his long journey home. What else should I check out?
Well, if you like the Odyssey, you definitely need to read Homer's other epic poem, the Iliad. It tells the story of the Trojan War, all the heroes and battles and the tragic consequences.
Sounds intense. Was all Greek literature epic poetry, though?
Oh no, they were pioneers in theater. They developed two main genres, tragedy and comedy.
Interesting. So what were the differences? Were their comedies anything like what we think of as funny today?
Their comedies were often satirical. They poke fun at politicians, philosophers, even everyday Athenian life. Imagine a play that's both hilarious and thought-provoking. It makes you question social norms and your own assumptions.
So it was like social commentary disguised as entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. And they had some brilliant comedic playwrights, like Aristophanes. His plays are still performed and studied today.
What about their tragedies? What made them so captivating?
Tragedies usually involve these noble characters who are facing some terrible suffering, and it was often caused by a fatal flaw or a twist of fate. They really explored these deep themes of human weakness, the power of destiny, the relationship between humans and the gods.
Some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Like plays like Oedipus Rex by Sophocles or Medea by Euripides. These are stories that have resonated with people for centuries because they explore the complexities of human nature and those eternal struggles between good and evil fate and free will.
So it sounds like Greek literature was as rich and diverse as their civilization itself.
It really was. Their works, whether epic poems or plays, explored the full spectrum of human experience. They offer these profound insights into the human condition that we can still relate to today.
As we wrap up this deep dive into ancient Greece, I'm struck by just how much they accomplished in such a short span of time.
It's amazing, right? Their contributions to democracy, philosophy, art, architecture, and literature, they've left a permanent mark on Western civilization.
And even though their world was so different from our own, they were asking many of the same questions we're still asking today. Questions about justice and freedom, the meaning of life, our place in the universe.
I think that's why we're still so drawn to ancient Greece. It's like a mirror. It reflects our own humanity, our successes, and our failures.
That's a great way to put it. It's been an incredible journey exploring this civilization. What's the one thing you'd want our listeners to take away from this?
I'd say that ancient Greece, even though it was thousands of years ago, is still relevant to us today. Their ideas, their stories, their art, it's all part of who we are. By learning about their world, we gain a deeper understanding of our own.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into ancient Greece. We hope you enjoyed it.